10 common Magic the Gathering cards are going to be reviewed today, right now, because it's common knowledge, and that's what we do here on the channel. We will start with our first card. It is Bull Aurochs. Have we done Bull Aurochs before? I don't think we have. I think we did the other Aurochs from Cold Snap, but not this one. Bull Aurochs is 1 and a green for a 2/1 Aurochs. It's got trample, and whenever this creature attacks, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each other attacking Aurochs. I love Aurochs. I think this is a fun idea. Aurochs have been in the game for, an incredibly long time. Aurochs from Ice Age, yeah. I've always had the 5th edition one, so this is not the art that I know. I've always known this art, but I remember Aurochs pretty fondly. It's not a good card. 4 mana for a 2/3 with trample that gets a little bigger, but you have to have the other Aurochs. Like that's what all the Aurochs have the same effect here, but it's just how much you're paying for them. So a 4 mana, a 6 mana, a 2 mana, 5 mana. There's it's a little rough. The 2 mana one makes the most sense, but it's also got 1 toughness, so it's pretty easy to pick off. Still, though, if you're playing a deck that plays a bunch of Aurochs, or you're playing some Changelings, you can certainly play some Changelings in here too, and those count. But there's not a lot of Aurochs available. I wasn't even looking. At the at just the common ones. These are all just common anyway. Actually, wait a minute. That's common. Is this one common? That one's uncommon. Okay, sorry. This one's uncommon. But so there are 3 common Aurochs and 1 uncommon Aurochs, and that's all of them. They've only made 4 of these. Someday they need to just make an Aurochs commander. That's what I want. Then you can play all these guys and still have a really bad time. But there 100% should be an Aurochs commander. Anyway, Bull Aurochs, not very good. 2 mana, 2/1 Trampler with an extremely conditional way of getting more power. I just don't think that quite cuts it. I think we're going to give this thing a... let's be cheeky. Let's give it a 2.1. That's its power and toughness. And move on. To Disturb Burial, 1 and a black for a sorcery. It also has buyback 3, so you can pay an additional 3 as you cast this spell. If you do, you put it back into your hand as the spell resolves. And you return target creature from your graveyard to your hand. So it's a Raise Dead that costs twice as much as a Raise Dead, and can cost 5 times as much as a Raise Dead, if you want to be able to play it turn over turn. We've seen buyback do some really dirty things. This card, probably not the one we're talking about when we see buyback doing dirty things. We're talking about the blue ones that will bounce cards back to your opponent's hand and then buy it back, or counter a spell and bring it back. I think that's Forbid that does that. And most of those that I'm talking about are not Pauper legal, so we're not thinking about them from a Pauper perspective. But buyback is still a very dangerous ability. When you have a lot of mana, you are able to just continually get the effect, but also get the card advantage of getting that card back. And that can be backbreaking at some points. Just imagine you're at a point you're late in the game in a Pauper game, which doesn't happen all the time, but it can. Imagine you're late enough in the game in Pauper where now you can just have this blocker that gets up there and blocks and dies, and then you can play this spell and buy it back, put it back in your hand, get the creature back into your hand, play the creature again. That is a lot of mana. Don't get me wrong. That's a lot of mana to do all this stuff. But you are potentially getting into a loop where your opponent can't do anything. Because every time you play the creature, you have another blocker. That blocker dies, you bring it back again. You just keep looping it that way. That can be really tough to overcome. And then imagine, you're playing a card like Refurbished Familiar, and that's the one you keep bringing back and playing. That's a discarded card every time for your opponent, or eventually a card draw for you when your opponent runs out of cards. It's good. It's just a good engine, and that's why it has to be priced so highly, because if that loop happens, you want that loop to happen late in the game where we just need to break through the board stall, and maybe that's a way of doing it. But I think generally Pauper games go fast enough. We have other ways of looping that stuff. The Leon and Squire Blood Fountain loops, of course Skyfisher Blood Fountain loops. Like there's ways of looping this kind of effect that's better than Disturb Burial here. So it's a pretty good card, but we have better options in Pauper, and we'll play those instead. Let's give this thing a 2.9, I think. Choking Sands. Oh, I think we've done Choking Sands before. I want to do Choking Sands again, though. 1 and double black for a sorcery. Destroy target non-swamp land. If that land was non-basic, Choking Sands deals 2 damage to that land's controller. Originally from Mirage. This is a cool card. That's a cool card. It does still sometimes see some play in Pauper, some sideboards that black used to be a real land destruction color, and now that has shifted more to red for sure, and it was always in red as well, but it's shifted even more to red and maybe even a little bit green as well. And that's why you'll see those Gruul kind of Ponza decks. Those are the still the Pauper decks that will have land destruction are mostly going to be in those red and green colors. That being said, though, it is nice. It destroys target non-swamp land, so that's a lot of different land potentials. It gets rid of artifact lands, not the bridges; those are indestructible. But it does get rid of just regular artifact lands. It can get rid of some dual lands. If you're able to pick off one of the Ravnica duels, the bounce lands. That's a huge tempo loss for your opponent when you're able to do that. And you're dealing them 2 damage since it's a non-basic land for most of those. It's also just a way of taking out, if your opponent is playing a very, like a big varied, like playing lots of colors, playing a big varied mana base that way. It's a way of going, oh, we only have 1 mountain available to you? I'm going to destroy that mountain. Good luck. See what happens. And this is 3 mana to destroy a land. That's basically a Stone Rain. It's a more conditional Stone Rain because it can't hit swamps. You're going to keep this in the sideboard because you're only going to board it in when you're playing against non-black decks, or at least non-mono black decks. But I think Choking Sands is still a pretty cool card, all things considered. I'm going to give this thing a 5.6, I think. I believe it does see some sideboard play, and I think it probably could end up seeing some more. In fact, I think I want to buy some copies for myself. Let's get a couple of copies of Choking Sands. Just to have them. Makes you feel good to just have them. Also, I never feel bad buying Mirage cards. What do we got next? It's Blighted Agent, 1 and a blue for a 1/1 Phyrexian human rogue with Infect. And this creature can't be blocked. So Infect, just if you don't remember, this creature deals damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters and to players in the form of poison counters. So when this creature can't be blocked, you're not worried about somebody blocking it and having to give the counters that way. This thing can block, though. So if you wanted to use this as a defender to give the -1/-1 counters, okay, you could do that. But more often than not, you are here to attack with this guy, get at least a poison counter on the opponent, and then to use the proliferate effects in your Poison Storm deck to be able to, get them the rest of the way to the 10 poison counters they need, and to win that way. This, though, it has a very specific use in the Poison Storm decks, and it's that most of the Poison Storm decks aren't playing many and or any creatures. So your opponent is potentially going to load up on things that will stop non-creature spells and take out, more importantly, they will take out things that do affect creatures. If they take out all of their creature removal, or if they take out their essence scatters so they can bring in more negates, well, you can board this in on your Poison Storm decks, and now they have no answer to your creature. And so now you can start swinging in and getting poison counters that way. And that's something they are unable to deal with. And then now on game 3, if there is a game 3, but now in game 3, they have to play the guessing game of, how much creature removal do I need to bring? And how much, non-creature hate do I also need to bring in? And that can be tough. That can be a really tough thing for an opponent to, a really tough position for them to be in on how they build their deck going forward. And it puts you in a really advantageous position of being able to always keep them on their toes. Blighted Agent's cool. It does get played in that Poison Storm deck, and while it's not the best card in that deck, it does serve a strong role, mostly as a sideboard piece, but a very important sideboard piece that can do some really good stuff. I'm going to give this thing a 5.9, I think. It's a cool card. Cool card. You can also play this in Commander and piss some people off, because anytime they see poison counters, they're just going to be angry. I have a deck that's all about unblockable creatures, little blue unblockable creatures, and I specifically don't play this guy because everyone gets pissed off when you play something that has infect. And I'm not trying to kill them with poison counters, although, I don't know. Maybe I should just say screw it and grab it. But these copies are a little expensive, $110 for this. It's got a secret lair drop version, which no one can read. That's even more expensive than that. I don't know. I should probably buy myself a Blighted Agent, but there's other unblockable little guys that I prefer in that deck. Solid Pauper card, if only for the one deck, but pretty good there. Next up is Aven Reedstalker, 3 and a blue for a 2/3 bird warrior with flash and flying. That's just a little too expensive for a little too generic of a card. The flash is nice. I get why it costs this much with flash and flying and a halfway decent stat line for a blue creature. Blue creatures are generally not all that great, or have to be overcosted to be decent. But I don't want to play this. This is because where are you playing this? What deck wants this? You have plenty of fairy decks that are playing much cheaper flying creatures, some that even have flash, and then flipping them into ninjas. You're not using this guy to flip into a ninja because you don't want to have to pay the 4 mana again to put this guy back on the table. And if you're not doing that, where do you want to play a 4 mana flash flying 2/3? And I think the answer is just kind of nowhere. It's probably decent and limited. Could be an okay little cube card for a very underpowered cube, but Pauper doesn't want this card. We'll give this let's just give it a straight 2. Face Vaulter, single black mana for a 1/1 goblin warrior. You can pay a black and sacrifice a goblin, and this creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So you're kind of getting a bit of an ATOG effect. You have to pay though, and you have to sacrifice goblins, so you're actually having to sacrifice real other creatures. Now, a couple problems here. First, before I get into the problems, I love this card. From original Lorwyn, fun little freaky guy. But here are the problems. One, it's black. If this was red, it would be a lot more playable, because most goblins are red. Lorwyn here with the Boggarts, they are black and red. They're Rakdos, but these goblins that are just straight black make it really hard to play in most decks. Most decks that want to play goblin decks, because there are just so many good red goblins already that even the good black goblins generally aren't good enough for you to splash black and ruin your mana base. Make your mana base less efficient, rather. The other problems here, sacrificing goblins, paying mana to do that is a little rough. Having to pay a black mana specifically is a little rough, because that puts you even further into black territory, and you're not able. When you splash black, you have to splash black a little harder, so you can continue paying for the cost of this, because you want to be able to use this potentially 2, 3, 4 times in a turn to get a really big boost. That means you need to have 2, 3, 4 black mana available to you for you to be able to do that. And the last thing is that you're sacrificing goblins. You're sacrificing real creatures here. ATOG is banned in Pauper, and it's banned because there's so many cheap little artifacts that don't matter at all that you can sacrifice and get a really big creature to swing in for that turn. And Face Vaulter wants you to sacrifice goblins, which are other creatures that could be attacking. And a lot of goblins are 1 power, so that's potentially okay, because now you're gaining more power. You're gaining +2 power to sacrifice a 1 power guy. That is power positive. But there's also a number of goblins that are power 2, or you have some kind of effect where those goblins have even more power than 2, and now you don't want to sacrifice those goblins because now you're going power negative to put it on this guy. Now, in a similar way to ATOG, you can swing in. Your opponent feels like they have to block this guy because you could sacrifice all your other goblins and make this guy huge. But also, if they do block this guy, you can sacrifice enough goblins to make this guy huge and kill the big blocker that they've got. So it does put them in an awkward position, and that's nice. But I think the mana requirements here, the requirements of sacrificing a real permanent on your table that could give you other value somewhere else, I think those end up making this a little too fixed of an ATOG, and I just can't give it a good score. I like it, but I can't end up giving it a good score. We will give it a let's go 2.1. Next is Corpseberry Cultivator, which is 1 and a hybrid Golgari and a hybrid Golgari for a 2/3 Squirrel Warlock. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may forage, which means to exile 3 cards from your graveyard or sacrifice a food. Why would you do that? Well, whenever you forage, you put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Forage is an okay ability from Bloomburrow. It's what the squirrels do here, and that's kind of fun. Sacrificing a food isn't the hardest thing to do. There's lots of ways of getting food in Pauper, and just sacrificing one of those is all right. In fact, sometimes you want to sacrifice foods because they work with Cauldron Familiars and things like that when you do that. You are also giving up a potential 3 life, though, every time you sacrifice a food, because you could have sacrificed it to the actual food effect and gained the life off of that. So you're not getting that when you do this. Is that +1/+1 counter more important than the potential 3 life? But you can also forage by exiling a few cards from your graveyard. There are decks that are fine doing that. There are decks that dredge decks, Golgari dredge decks that are milling a bunch of cards. They're throwing a bunch of cards in their graveyards. There's madness decks that are throwing a bunch of cards in their graveyards, and you could forage those things away and exile those. And sometimes, now it's not the right colors, but even in Secrets of Strixhaven, you have the Lorehold, the red and white, that wants you to remove spells remove cards from your graveyard to get more effects. And this is a guaranteed way of removing cards from your graveyard turn after turn after turn to be able to do that. Now, it is you have to exile 3 cards. That is the cost, is exiling 3 cards. So you can't just exile 1 of the 3. Like if you have 1 card in your graveyard, you won't be able to forage it. You have to have at least 3 so you can pay that cost. And how many cards do you have in your graveyard? How many times are you going to be able to forage to be able to make that work? Those are all good questions. The other good question here is, how is a +1/+1 counter worth all that? Is a 3 mana 2/3 that can get a little bigger each turn, is that enough? And to be fair, this does say whenever you forage. So this guy has a way to forage himself. You can forage with other different cards as well and get potentially even more value off this guy, because you're getting the effect that they forage for. Plus, this guy still gets his forage trigger, which is nice. You're not playing that. This guy, he gets bigger, but he doesn't have any sort of evasion on him. He doesn't have trample. He doesn't do anything with that power and toughness. So I just don't think you play this. I think it's too generic to really end up working out. I will give this thing a 2 point. I don't mean to meme on this one, but I'm giving it a 2.3. I know it's power and toughness, but I think that's actually what it deserves. Madcap Skills, cool name. 1 and a red for an enchantment aura. Enchants a creature. Enchanted creature gets +3/+0 and has menace. Okay. That's not bad. Auras generally are not the best things because they're so easy to blow out, to get blown out on that. They remove the creature and you lose the aura as well. That's some kind of card disadvantage at some point. But we've seen cards that like being modified. There's plenty of cards that like being modified. And this is a pretty good modification. And sorry, modifications are an equipment's attached to it. It has a 1/1 counter on it, or it has an aura attached to it. So those are ways of modifying a creature. And this could be a pretty good modification. Let's just think about a couple of things that you could put this on. Skyward Spider. You're probably imagining playing a Boros deck with this, white and red, because these are hybrids. I guess you could play an Izzet thing as well, or a Jeskai that plays all of them. But when this thing is modified, it also has flying. So now if you give that Madcap Skills to it, now it's a 5/2 with Ward 2, flying, and menace. That's pretty good. That's pretty good for 4 mana total. I like that. You know what else I like is Champion of the Flame. Champion of the Flame is 1 and a red. It's a 1/1 with trample. And this creature gets +2/+2 for each aura and equipment attached to it. So you put the Madcap Skills on this guy. That's an aura, so that gives it +2/+2. So now it's a 3/3 with trample. But then the Madcap Skills gives it another +3 power. So now it's a 6/3, 6/3 with trample and menace. And that is really scary for an opponent to handle. And that's only going to be 4 mana for all those things together. There's some pretty good things you can do with Madcap Skills. Like, it's a lot of things don't just generally have menace. So giving a creature menace from this is a nice little bonus. If this said it gives it +3/+0 and trample, that would probably be better generally for a lot of things. But the Champion of the Flame wouldn't want it as much because it already has trample. It wouldn't. I'm gonna say it wouldn't be as useful on the Skyward Spider. It probably would be. Menace or trample would probably be negligible when you already have a creature with flying, because now you're forcing your opponents to have more. In either case, you're forcing your opponents to have more flying creatures, either to block the additional trample damage or because you have to block with an additional creature on the menace. So for flying, it's a little bit different than creatures on the ground, but still, I think this is pretty good. I like this card. I think it's pretty decent for the effect. I think the cost is good for the effect that you get. It is just 2 mana. You're probably not getting blown out that hard, even if if the creature that this is on ends up being taken out. I think that's a trade you're willing to make most of the time. I like this one. I really do. I'm going to give this thing a 4, I believe. Next up, Charging Paladin, 2 and a white for a 2/2 human knight. Whenever this creature attacks, it gets +0/+3 until end of turn. This is from Portal. We have I don't think I'd only seen the Portal art before, but this Exodus art is pretty cool too. Anyway, this isn't very good. Like, sure, it keeps your creature alive most of the time. Comes at 2/5 when it attacks, but kind of who cares? it's still pretty easy for your opponent to block a creature that is only 2 power. Sometimes they'll just even let it in because they're like, 2 power. Okay, I'll take 2 damage. Big deal. Most of these attacks triggers, you want to add power, so then your opponent feels forced to block it. Or you'd rather this guy say when he blocks, he gets +0/+3, because now it makes more sense as a blocker that you could defend against it even more. But having it wouldn't be a very charging paladin, though, if you had to block with it. But just it staying alive by attacking, I don't know. If you gave this something else that had some kind of trigger when it attacks, or maybe it had death touch or something, and you had a way of giving your creature that extra effect. Now it becomes a little scarier for the opponent, and this thing has that survivability where you can attack turn over turn and get that additional value. But as it is, it's not very good on its own, and I will give this thing a 2.1, I think, and that might even be a little generous. Next card is our last card of the day, I believe, and then it's Dimir Locket. I think we've done Lockets before, so why don't I give you a quick one on this one, and then we'll do a bonus card. 3 mana for an artifact. It taps for blue or black, and you can pay 4 hybrid Dimir mana and tap it and sack it to draw 2 cards. It's okay. It's a 3 mana rock. They're fine. It does have a way of drawing you cards, but it's kind of whatever. Lockets generally, I think, are something like a 2.2, 2.3, something like that. They're not amazing. You don't really play them. So what'll be our extra card here? Rampaging Classmate. We've done this one. We definitely did this one because I think I remember ended up liking it. Yeah, I remember liking this one, but we did it. All right, let's try again. Gixian Skullflare, I don't believe we have done. It's 2 and a black for a 2/3 Phyrexian Human Assassin. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 3 or more creature cards in your graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. I don't mind that. That seems all right. That's a pretty easy effect to get. There's all sorts of, whether it's Golgari Dredge or just any deck that is able to mill a bunch of cards, or Mono Black Sacrifice that's able to sacrifice a bunch of creatures and put them into your graveyard, and this thing just grows turn over turn. Okay. It is 3 mana to start with, though, and you generally want these guys that grow bigger to be 2 mana. Your Gixian Infiltrators and things like that. Your Ajani's Pride. I know Ajani's Pridemate's not in Pauper. Should be. But those cards that continue to grow generally are 2 mana, and you feel better about paying 2 mana for it. When you're paying 3 mana, it's a little slow. Because imagine, you pay 3 mana, you put this on the table. You've already had to put enough cards in your graveyard, or enough creature cards in your graveyard, to be able to activate this thing's effect. But it won't activate that turn. It has to activate the beginning of your next upkeep. So that gives your opponent a lot of time to deal with this guy. Even then, it turns this guy into a 3/4 on turn 4, and with like the best case scenario that you've already put enough other creatures into your graveyard that works that way. And that's not always going to be the case. You probably won't be able to have 3 creatures in your graveyard. You won't be able to guarantee that on turn 3 to be ready for turn 4 for this thing to get bigger. You're going to have the trouble that this thing can only get bigger one time each of your turns, whereas something like Gixian Infiltrator is just on things being sacrificed, and you can do that multiple times. You can do that multiple times on your turn. You can do that on your opponent's turn too, and have that thing get bigger. You have something like Carrion Feeder, which is able to continually activate its effect and sacrifice creatures to get bigger itself, and it can do that at instant speed, which is useful. I liked this when I first saw it, and the more I think about it, the more I think, whoa, this thing is actually incredibly slow, and I don't like it. It's probably a really cool limited card, but outside of that, I don't think this really sees any play, nor should it. And I'll give it something like a I'm just gonna give it a 2. I think cool art, but that's kind of the only thing that it's got going for it. That'll be it. We will catch you on the next one. See you then.